You will even find people who write about the 16th century as if magic were a medieval survival and science the new thing that came in to sweep it away. Those who have studied the period know better. There was very little magic in the Middle Ages. The 16th and 17th centuries are the high noon of magic. The serious magical endeavor and the serious scientific endeavor are twins. One was sickly and died, the other strong and throve. But they were twins. They were born of the same impulse. This is Pints with Jack, Season 9, Episode 20, The Abolition of Man. Chapter 3, The Abolition of Man. Part 3, The Magician's Bargain.
Have you been looking everywhere, searching for a place where you belong? Away from the masses, among clinking glasses, where the hearth fire is on. Let the laughter welcome you in, that eagle and child din. There's room at this table, so take a seat and tuck right in. Pints with Jack. Pints with Jack.
Well, welcome friends to Pints with Jack. As we were wrapping up the last episode, Matt dropped off to take his wife to the hospital as her contractions were starting to pick up. So I'm guessing you'd like to know how that ended. Well, they came home again. It was a false alarm. Then they went back to the hospital a few days later, and we have a birth to celebrate. So today, Matt is at home looking after Mary, Margaret, and their brand new baby. So, he's doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Do you think we should tell the name or let Matt do it? Because I don't think we're going to be back together until Dr. Ward's episode.
Which is Friday, and that may be a little... I think we should probably tell the name, don't you?
Yes. He's clearly inspired by my wife. It is Sienna Marie Bush. My wife's name is Marie, and we drive a green Sienna.
Everybody wants to be like you, David, and who can blame them?
Well, exactly. But no, the baby is absolutely gorgeous, and Matt has sent us a few videos of him cooing over her, so I expect him to be quite distracted for some time. Yes. But with regards to my own life, I'm breathing a big sigh of relief as work pressures are now off. We've hit all of the deadlines. And as such, I've had a little bit more time to do a whole bunch of half-pint interviews, which will keep us going until the end of the season. And I am prepping my own deep dive into artificial intelligence. I will try not to talk about it as much as Matt.
Nobody talks about it as much as Matt. That's not a very great promise.
Oh, how about yourself, Andrew? Any great achievements recently?
Well, tomorrow, Kristen and I drive to Orlando, Florida, where I get to officially wear my happy little 8-pointed hat. Listeners, you can't see it, but I have my doctoral tam, and I've got my robes, and the degree is actually officially been conferred. But we'll be meeting with Northwind Seminary folks, including Reggie Weems and Michael Christensen. Serena Higgins was hoping to be there, but had a traffic thing, and so sorry that she won't be able to join us. But 3 of us will be receiving our degrees and dressed up in our robes, and the colors of our seminary are the same as Gryffindor, and so I think I'm in.
Wonderful. So how should we now address you?
It's the same. Lazo Minor is fine. The bewilderingly Kristen's husband, no accounting for taste. The official at church, I'll still be Father Andrew. When I write it out now, it's the Reverend Dr. Andrew Lazo, M.A., M.Div., DTHM, Doctorate of Theology and Doctor of Theology and Ministry. So it was a long time coming, but the best part about it is I received really great marks from my advisors, and they think that the first 4 chapters of the book Until We Have Faces are ready to go to publisher. So I probably have 4, maybe 5 chapters left to write. But I'm making great progress, and I'm hoping to maybe take a sample chapter and make a pitch to a publishing company, and then get a deadline for this year, and hopefully get the book done this year and maybe out by next year, the 70th anniversary of Lewis, the American publication of Lewis's best book. So very exciting. I'm hoping to maybe do something about Till We Have Faces at the Portland conference. We're certainly going. We also have, co-sponsored by Pints with Jack, it's official, the C.S. Lewis Foundation is doing a pilgrimage to Ireland and England, and I'll be co-hosting that. So Steve Elmore and I will be the guides on that tour. We've already talked to a couple of friends who may be coming. So that's in late July. So I'll be going over to England and Ireland. And it looks like there may be a chance to return to Ireland even in the fall. So lots of good things in the offing. And in the meantime, just nice to have the pressure of the doctorate done, turned in the both books that I was editing. And so I get to, sit with a pint and watch the sunset with my wife from time to time. So I'm happy about that, as is she. So what are you drinking today?
I'm drinking Aberfeldy. And with what will you be toasting the new little shrub?
Well, I so enjoyed my my little pint of Old Speckled Hen. And so we toast our new little shrub to Sienna Marie Bush. May God bless you all the days of your life and bless your parents. May you be a blessing to them for as long as you live. And we offer our toast to you and all of our best wishes and prayers. Cheers.
Cheers. Well, now we need to get on with the episode. And of course, it begins with the recap. So, the argument so far. The book begins with Lewis arguing against subjectivism, contrasting it with a doctrine of objective value, which he says we must presuppose, and he calls this the Tao. While critics may attempt to define a system of values outside of the Tao, based on utilitarianism, reason, or instinct, Jack shows that they all fail and are simply cherry-picking from the Tao without justification. He notes that, alternatively, rather than attempting to ground a different system of values, critics may abandon value entirely, simply shaping humanity as they see fit, without even trying to justify it. And then we began Chapter 3 this month by pondering the phrase, man's conquest of nature. After considering the aeroplane, the wireless, and the contraceptive, Lewis concludes that man's conquest of nature is simply the accumulation of power by some men over others. And Lewis asks us to consider humanity throughout time, with each generation attempting to limit the power of its predecessors and exercise its own power over its successors. Up until now, a generation's ability to do this has been somewhat limited. However, Lewis warns us of a future where eugenics, prenatal conditioning, and applied psychology will allow one singular generation to shape the rest of humanity for all time. If these men operate outside of the Tao, where words such as good and bad have no meaning, how will they choose to shape us? Well, deprived of the Tao, the conditioners will do this based on their own natural impulses. Ironically, this means that as man thinks he's conquering nature, nature will actually have conquered man. Human beings will have become objects, merely artifacts to be manipulated. And the conditioners will force their will onto their subjects, and Jack suggests that they may even come to hate their subjects, envying the illusion of whatever artificial conscience they choose to impart to them. Jack then re-expresses his argument, showing how nature is just what we call something when we reduce it to its parts and manage to exert control over it. In fact, he says that we reduce things to mere nature in order that we may conquer them, and when we do this, we lose something. And once again, he warns us of a final step from which, when taken, we may never recover, reducing our own species to nature and losing something essential to our humanity. And in the final section, which we're going to read today, we'll further explore this magician's bargain.
Well, we're getting to the heart and the height of his argument, and it's Lewis at some of his most philosophical, but he's also working it out to its logical end. And he begins by pointing out that, like Lear, we have been trying to have it both ways, to lay down our human prerogative, yet at the same time to retain it. It's impossible. Either we are rational spirit obliged forever to obey the absolute values of the Tao, Lewis says, or else we are mere nature to be kneaded and cut into new shapes for the pleasures of masters who must, by hypothesis, have no motive but their own natural impulses. Only the Tao provides a common human law of action which can overarch rulers and the ruled alike. A dogmatic belief in objective value is necessary to the very idea of a rule which is not tyranny or an obedience which is not slavery. The Tao is the only real conscience. Otherwise, everything is nature. And in that, if everything is nature, then it's nature red in tooth and claw. It's the most powerful dominating over the less powerful. And there's without the Tao, without this kind of dogmatic right and wrong, it points to a very bleak future, and one where those who are dominating will end up dominating it all and probably abolishing the species. So kind of a grim world pictured, isn't it?
Oh, yes. This last chapter is not a cheery read. I did want to make a couple of notes there when he describes us as trying to be like King Lear. If you haven't read King Lear, Lear gives his kingdom to his daughters, but he retains a large number of knights for himself, as though he were still monarch. So he's given up the crown, but he hasn't. And he says, we're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to give up what makes us truly human and at the same time try and retain it. And it's not going to end well. And that was a wonderful line where he says, a dogmatic, and by dogmatic he means it's good, it's true, it's fitting. Dogmatism has got more of a negative connotation, I'd say, these days. But he says that a dogmatic belief in objective value is necessary to the very idea of a rule which is not tyranny or an obedience which is not slavery. You know, there is this external standard. And he does actually work out some of this in an essay that he wrote. It's a really fun read, actually, The Humanitarian Theory of Punishment. And I can't quite remember if the Lesson and Lewis guys have done it yet, or I've just spoken about it with Jordan. But if you haven't read it, well worth a read.
By the way, dogma can become kind of a dangerous world, and dogmatic is almost, especially in Protestant circles, almost never used in anything but a negative context. Oh, don't be so dogmatic. But some of the dogmas, there are 255 dogmas of the Catholic Church. Here are a couple of them. There is only one God. That's a dogma. Yes.
I'm a fan.
God is absolutely faithful. Also a fan. So there's the dogmas that are declared. All the dead will rise again on the last day with their bodies. I mean, the dogmas are the unvarying truths of Christianity. Christ on his second coming will judge all men. So to be dogmatic is to say that there are some absolute truths. And that's an argument that Lewis has always made and will always make. And again, I'll point back to Mere Christianity. Right and wrong is a clue to the meaning of the universe. And his conclusion there is an absolute right, there is an absolute wrong, and that tells us about how the universe is made. Lewis, again, is in spinning this out to its ultimate kind of philosophical extent, but it's that same thing. If there is no right and wrong, there is no meaning. And if there is no meaning, there's no meaning to being no meaning. So.
And even the English language reveals a great truth, because feline lovers, there's a reason it's not called catmatic.
Yes, dogmatic, catmatic, I get it. It's an English pun.
So he's been speaking about this tyranny that's going to come when we get rid of the Tao. Andrew, who does he think is liable to bring this tyranny?
Anyone, practically anyone who will assert any power. And he says, this is a quote from the chapter, he's not here thinking solely, perhaps not even chiefly, of those who are our public enemies at the moment. And he's writing, of course, in 1942, and so he's probably thinking about Hitler. It echoes what he says that same year in the Screwtape Letters, where he says, I don't care all that much about the humans' current war. right? It's what use you make of it. And so, he says, the process which will abolish man goes on apace amongst communists and Democrats, no less than among fascists. And remember, at this point, the communists were on the side of the Democrats. So Stalin and the United States, Russia and the United States, were united against Nazi Germany. But he says anybody can use that kind of tyranny. And we're seeing that in our own political situation. This is where Matt would say, that seems strikingly like what's going on today. Yes, it is.
Yeah, I do particularly like his warning about this abolition can come even through those who are far more mild-mannered. Think of Screwtape and the bureaucracy of hell. Lewis says, many a mild-mannered scientist in pince-nez, those are the little glasses that sit at the end of the nose. So many a mild scientist in pince-nez, many a popular dramatist, many an amateur philosopher in our midst, means in the long run just the same as the present rulers of Germany. Which also speaks to the power of every single person's life in terms of how they can shape the society that's around them. When I see that mild-mannered scientist, I also think of the average office worker. And are you familiar with The Banality of Evil?
No.
It was Eichmann in Jerusalem. It was basically a report of everything that went on with regards to the Jews in World War II. And the finding was, it was amazing what you could get your average everyday office administrator to do. Great, horrendous evil. But to them, it was just, a spreadsheet, or, it was a set of accounts of numbers and names. And the people that they were trafficking and disposing of had ultimately been dehumanized.
We think of that pattern of action, habit, and virtue that Lewis kind of sketches out in Mere Christianity. And one can be inured, one can become numb to any kind of evil, in the same way that one could probably get bored of goodness, at least in this life. And, people are just following orders, or they're going along to get along, or they're doing what the government told them to do. And it's the average bureaucrat, it's the small person like you and me. If we do not check evil, then evil will overtake. And if I can't see the potential to be as evil, as anyone that, that we've seen in recent history, then I think I'm deluding myself. And unless I appeal to a higher power, unless I submit to absolute reason and absolute benignity, absolute goodness, if I don't surrender myself, right, I will end up being kind of a tyrant. And, you see it until we have faces. Orwell goes again and again, twisting things and becoming, in the name of love, becoming so selfish and so is so hateful. It's this, you see it again and again in The Great Divorce. Those who will not give up themselves will only have themselves, and they'll become tyrants. You see it in the dwarves being for the dwarves at the end of the last battle. So he's really kind of sketching out these ideas that he'll trade upon for the next couple of decades.
And he then gives a great one-line summary of this entire book. Traditional values are to be debunked, and mankind is to be cut out into some fresh shape at the will, which must, by hypothesis, be an arbitrary will, of some few lucky people in one lucky generation which has learned how to do it. The belief that we can invent ideologies at pleasure, and the consequent treatment of mankind as mere, and he uses a Greek word here, which means mere matter. It's literally the same word that you use for firewood. So the consequent treatment of mankind as mere matter specimens, preparations, begin to affect our very language. And I'm sure Andrew has something that he'd like to say about language and the poem Readjustment, because he does this every time. Go for it, Andrew.
Hey, I've been invited. I'm going to. I'm still kind of trying to get to the bottom of this poem, Readjustment. But Lewis basically says, I thought that at the end of all of my life, I would find this kind of glory. But instead, I find some really terrible things. And so here's the poem. You can find it online. We'll have a link to it. It's called Readjustment. And Lewis says, I thought there would be a grave beauty, a sunset splendor in being the last of one's kind, a topmost moment as one watched the huge wave curving over Atlantis, the shrouded barge turning away with wounded Arthur, or Ilium burning. So he's saying, okay, if I got to the end of the race, I would get this kind of glorious sense of this crescendo. I think he may be thinking also of Ragnarok, of the twilight of the gods. Atlantis sinking, or there's this, at the end of Arthur's life, he drifts off in a barge, or the burning of Troy. That's Ilium. But he says, now I see that all along I was assuming a posterity of gentle hearts, someone, however distant in the depths of time, who could pick up our signal, who could understand a story. There won't be. So he's saying exactly what he's saying here in Abolition of Man. I thought that the further one went, the more one would have a sense of gentleness, of nobility, of the goodness of the race, and a sense of the power of story. And instead of story, and I mean, in some ways, it's an indictment on the Green Book again, right? These English teachers who are not teaching us how to read English better, poetry better, they're teaching us how to have these kind of psychological values that will end up abolishing the race. There won't be someone who can pick up our signal or understand a story. I think Jack was very pessimistic now, and I think that the success of Pints with Jack indicates that he might have been wrong. And then the last stanza, he says, between the new hominidae, these are the new apes, between the new hominidae and us who are dying, already there rises a barrier across which no voice can ever carry, for devils are unmaking language. So he's saying that part of this process of dehumanizing, of the post-human, is not an advancement to becoming better. We're sinking down into apes, and we're losing the ability of language. We're losing the ability of story. We must let that alone forever, Lewis says. Uproot your loves, one by one, with care from the future, and trusting to no future, receive the massive thrust and surge of the many-dimensional, timeless rays converging on this small, significant dewdrop, the present that mirrors all. And in some ways, it's a great description of his project, of Tolkien's project. You know, we're not getting better and better, right? Evolution is not making us better and better people. In fact, it'll end up making us the worst possible people. And so instead of trusting to our future, instead of progress, of stepping towards some great future like Weston touts, stay with this now and take these, these timeless rays, these many-dimensional timeless rays, take God's inspiration and light and make use of it here in this moment, in this one moment. Tell a story, read a story, love a friend. I think this is what Lewis is saying. And that's part of how we defeat, these devils that are unmaking language and sapping us of all meaning and goodness.
And he gives a few examples of how language has changed. He says we don't talk about virtue anymore, we talk about integration. We don't talk about diligence, but dynamism. And rather than talking about boys likely to be worthy of a commission, notice that worthy. So there's that relationship that was attacked in chapter 1 about some objects deserve a certain kind of response. Now they are potential officer material. And this is Lewis, it is most cynical. Virtues of thrift and temperance, and even of ordinary intelligence. These are now called sales resistance.
Yes. We have not killed bad men. We have liquidated unsocial elements. And that's part of what was going on in Germany at the time. So, yeah.
And it's that same dehumanizing language.
Yep.
And I also discovered this quotation in Poetic Diction by Owen Barfield, one of the other Inklings. He wrote there, of all devices for dragooning, and by that he means coercing, of all devices for coercing the human spirit, the least clumsy is to procure its abortion in the womb of language. Vivid.
Yeah.
And one of the things about this use of language is Lewis says that the insidious nature of what's been going on is actually concealed by abstraction. And this abstraction is man. He says, while we're still in the Tao, that has actually a concrete reality. That actually means something, what it means to truly be human. And we began this chapter talking about man's conquest of nature. And he says that as long as we're in the Tao, we can talk about man having control over himself in the same way that we talk about an individual's self-control. But as soon as we step outside of the Tao, that just disappears. Man's power over himself now just simply refers to what we've spoken about before, the rule of the conditioners over the others. And he calls it the conditioned human material, because they're not even really human anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Now, Jack will say that some people will inevitably say that he's anti-science. He's an obscurist. He's someone that just wants to prevent the growth and distribution of knowledge. How does he defend himself? This I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, well, he says he's talking about the abstraction man. And he says that it has a meaning from within the Tao. So as you think about the idea of man, here's what he says. In the Tao itself, as long as we remain within it, we find the concrete reality in which to participate is to be truly human. The real common will and common reason of humanity, alive and growing like a tree and branching out as the situation varies into ever new beauties and dignities of application. And this kind of coincides with his picture of Christian humanity, right? Of growing out like a tree. And I think, didn't Weston use this metaphor, or wasn't this Perelandra? I think I remember something there.
Yeah, he does this idea of something over time as its own organism. He does that in Mere Christianity as well. It's definitely one of his favorite things, right? To think about humanity over time, yeah.
And humanity becomes more and more diverse, right? And less like each other, so that they can portray the wholeness of who God is. The picture of God, the picture of Christ, needs the entire body of Christ, right? The whole history of Christians throughout the world, in order to fully capture even the beginning of the diversity of his goodness. And so it's diversifying rather than unifying, which is what Weston seems to want, and Screwtape as well.
So returning to my question, Jack says that some people will inevitably say he's anti-science and an obscurist who just wants to prevent the distribution of knowledge. How does he defend himself?
One of the things that he does is he reminds us what science means. Scientia means knowledge, right? And he says that the real natural philosophers will know that this isn't really fair, because they know that as he defends objective value, he is, among other things, defending the value of knowledge, because with objective value, it disappears. Without objective value, it disappears too. So if the scientist says we must trust science and do good science, he's appealing to the Tao. Even an atheist scientist will be appealing to absolute moral value. Science is good. The expansion of knowledge is good. It's helpful. We should provide for it. We should make for it. He also defends himself against the charges of being anti-science by saying that science itself must provide the safeguard against this abolition of man, right? And I think you see a similar kind of argument if you think about the moral outrage over nuclear catastrophe, right? If humans are just human and they have created this bomb and then they bomb each other out of existence, well, why is that bad? It's just the next stage in evolution. But everything about us, even people who will claim no kind of theism or absolute theology, will say, hey, it's wrong to be able to destroy the whole world. And the preservation of the species has some value. even though they can't justify that, necessarily with a theological purpose, they see it, they sense it, and they can't avoid it. I think it's born in us. And if we say no to that, the implications are exactly what Jack's pointing out here.
And I think the term he uses here is significant because he talks about real natural philosophers, because this is an older term. It's before modern science and the separation of it out into different disciplines, biology, physics, etc. The older term was you were a natural philosopher. But before we get to that, he spends a little bit of time talking about magic. Why is he doing that?
I love this. So one of the things, there's a couple of great reads that are on the kind of on the corners of the Lewis bookshelf. The Discarded Image is his kind of, it's his prolegomena to, it's his introduction to medieval and Renaissance literature. It's kind of, I don't know, when I was in college, everybody had to read E.M.W. Tilliard's The Elizabethan World Picture to kind of find out what, the Elizabethan mind was like. Lewis's Discarded Image does a similar thing, saying, here's what medievals thought about and thought like. And one of the things that medievals are trying to do is they're trying to use magic. They're trying to harness these kind of spiritual, supernatural forces. And one of the most common things that they're trying to do is turn lead into gold, right? Is alchemy. But if you look at what magic is doing in the Middle Ages, it's the same as what science is doing. It's performing very deliberate experiments, assuming that there are powers or forces that can be used in order to turn lead into gold. Now, I grew up watching Bewitched, which will tell you how old I am. And there, Samantha could make herself, appear 50 miles away, or prepare a meal, or clean up the house, or change somebody's appearance just by wiggling her nose, right? And that was magic. But the real kind of medieval picture of magic is better seen in Harry Potter, and that's one of the reasons that I love those movies. When you're in Snape's class and you add the right ingredients in the right proportion and stir them around the right way, you get the right result. And if you don't have the right ingredients, or you fail a step of that experiment, you don't get the right result. And so magic and science were twins, right? They just assumed that there was some kind of higher, stronger power. The magicians did. And that turned out not to be true, which is why magic faded off into nothing.
And Lewis had described this entire situation as a magician's bargain, whereby man surrenders object after object and finally himself to nature in return for power. He says, I meant what I said. And he first of all corrects a misunderstanding. You've covered a good deal of it. But he points out that people often write about the 16th century as if magic were the medieval survival and science the new thing that came to sweep it out of the way. That was our quote of the week. He says that those who have studied the period know better. There was very little magic in the Middle Ages, so that's the 5th to the 15th. And it's in the 16th and 17th century, that's the high noon of magic. The serious magical endeavor and the serious scientific endeavor are twins. One was sickly and died, the other strong and throve, but they were twins. They were born on the same impulse. And we have spoken about this a little bit on the show before. Season 5, episode 40, I interviewed Dr. John G. West about his book, The Magician's Twin, which really goes into an exploration of this idea of Lewis's. And it actually also reminded me of Arthur C. Clarke and, by extension, Thor. Because if you remember the first Thor movie, when they're trying to talk about how they can do the things that they do, they're really appealing to Arthur C. Clarke that any sufficiently advanced technology will look like magic. At the moment in my pocket, I have a small rectangle that I can use to call up any information from anything, anywhere, as well as videos of cats playing the piano. Technology, when it's sufficiently advanced, looks kind of like magic. But it's the common impulse behind both magic and science that he wants us to focus on. And this is in contrast, again, with chapter 1. And he puts it this way: for the wise men of old, the cardinal problem had been how to conform the soul to reality. It's this objective value. There are some things out there that exist, and there are appropriate responses to them. So my job is now to conform my soul to reality,
Mm-hmm.
specifically to God. And he said, and the solution had been knowledge, self-discipline, and virtue. So basically, reality is out there. It's my job to change myself to be in accord with it.
Mm-hmm.
But he says, afterwards, the plan was different. For magic and applied science alike, the problem is how to subdue reality to the wishes of men. So reality is out there. Now I want to change it so I don't have to. He said the solution is a technique, and both in the practice of this technique, so both science and magic, are ready to do things hitherto regarded as disgusting and impious, such as digging up and mutilating the dead, be it for magic incantations or for scientific inquiry.
Yeah.
And to really drive home this point, he compares Francis Bacon with Christopher Marlowe's Faustus. Would you mind just unpacking those references a bit, because they're pretty loaded?
Yeah. So Francis Bacon, I don't know very well at all, but Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. Faust is this guy, this scientist who trades his soul to Mephistopheles, to the devil, in order to gain power over everything. And one would think that he would use his power for these kind of sweeping grandeur-like gestures. And, he uses it at one point to trick the horsemen and to tweak the Pope. And so Faust has all of this power, and he ends up just using it selfishly. And that's one would assume that, with all of the power in the world, I would do these magnificent, huge, things, kind of like the Disney movie with Mickey Mouse. And that's kind of not what happens at all. It's not all that dissimilar to the stories that we hear about people who win the lottery. And it's like, oh, their lives are going to change. And, a few years later, they're broker than they were before.
Well, Francis Bacon, so he was an early science guy. He was really big into natural philosophy, the term that was used before we started calling it science. And he was guided by the scientific method, and he thought that we needed to learn so that we could exert power. So we learn stuff so we get to control nature. And this is why Lewis says that the true object is to extend man's power to the performance of all things possible. And that he rejects magic because it doesn't work. But his goal is that of the magician.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's some of what why Lewis had some trepidation about Arthur C. Clarke. And in fact, there's an interesting book called From Narnia to a Space Odyssey, and it contains the letters between Clarke and C.S. Lewis. They were correspondents. And in fact, Clarke invited Lewis to come and speak to the British Interplanetary Society, and it didn't work out for Lewis to go. One of the things that Clarke and the BIP wanted to do was to explore and to colonize and to populate other worlds. And of course, as we know from Perelandra and other things, Lewis was really against that. Clarke actually was a friend of Joy Davidman's as well. They hung out together when they were in London. And so Lewis here is really trying to move the soul of his age away from this kind of mindless, blind progress and assertion of man's whole priority. And he's trying to pull back. What's the purpose of science? And what are the implications of science if you try to do it without the Tao?
And he points out that science has been successful because of its good elements, but that the bad elements aren't irrelevant, because that can affect the direction in which things move.
Yeah.
He has this wonderful line, it might be going too far to say that modern scientific movement was tainted from its birth, but I think it would be true to say that it was born in an unhealthy neighborhood and at an inauspicious hour. Its triumphs may have been too rapid and purchased at too high a price. Reconsideration and something like repentance may be required.
Love that. And because part of what we have been handed, certainly part of what has been handed down to us since the kind of advent of the scientific method and Darwin and all the rest of it, is this sense that science is good and religion is bad. Science is true and religion is subjective and superstitious. And, any thinking rational person will reject religion and embrace science. But we get back to our old friend again, the old saw, the old problem. What do you do? How do you define and describe what you mean by science? And what is it good? What do we mean by good? And what is it there for? And so, Lewis, I think part of the reason that this book is still being read is because it still really kind of addresses some of those issues. Now, don't we wish Matt was here?
Yeah, I really wish Matt was here for this section, for no other reason than it would give me an opportunity to talk about David Copperfield. And this time I would actually be talking about magic rather than the Dickens novel. That's a deep cut for those of you who have listened to every single episode, including some of those early ones.
Yeah.
All right, so given everything that he said about magic and science, why might Lewis imagine that actually science could possibly be the preventative measure against this abolition of man?
Well, he wonders if maybe there could be a new natural philosophy. The term is really interesting. It's a pre-19th century term used to describe science and its different subdisciplines. So could this be because it was a term when thinkers weren't so reductive? Lewis says, is it then possible to imagine a new natural philosophy continually conscious that the natural object produced by analysis and abstraction is not reality, but only a view, and always correcting the abstraction? And so Lewis, instead of rejecting science, is actually trying to get science to do what science is supposed to do, and which it seems to be departing from at the moment.
And he names two men who might possibly have an approach that would fulfill this. The first is Goethe. And this is, incidentally, another guy who wrote his own version of Faust, about a man who sells his soul to the devil. Yep. Lewis doesn't seem to have looked into it too much, so he says, maybe. And he also suggests Rudolf Steiner, who was an anthroposophist and who Lewis would have known through Owen Barfield, although it's kind of unclear as to quite how much of the anthroposophist texts he'd read. But the point by throwing out both of these names is neither of these men were materialists. They saw nature as more than just mere matter. And so what he's wanting in this new natural philosophy, in this new form of science that looks at the whole and doesn't dissect everything, to destroy it by pulling everything down to its component parts and reducing it to that and nothing more. He's hoping that people with a greater sensitivity to the whole and not bound by materialism could offer a way forward. And he also refers to this German Jewish theologian Martin Buber, who talked about the I and thou. And Lewis's point in mentioning him is the thou, the other person should not become an it. You're still recognizing the personal aspect of it, not just reducing something to being the sum of its parts.
Yeah, that's actually a really important point, because some of what's happening in modernism with the advent of the machine and the turn of the century and the scientific method and all the rest is people are, because science has kind of explained so many things, people in the teens and the 20s are turning back to magic. And in fact, Barfield or Charles Williams was part of the Second Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is a magic working society. And people are really interested because science has kind of said, okay, there's no such thing as the supernatural and the soul. That abolishment, and because we have left aside a belief in God, that void of the supernatural being out there creates, kind of reinvigorates his view of magic. Martin Buber too, I and thou. Thou is the intimate, right? Thou isn't a distancing pronoun. If you know Spanish, tú is the intimate pronoun. Du in German, or tu in French. Thou was the intimate pronoun. And so for Buber, the philosopher, the Jewish philosopher, to say I and thou, he's talking about any other thou outside of me, but he's also talking about God. And for Lewis to then contrast it and God, like thing and spirit, not only is that fitting right into his argument, but the word it is really, really interesting in Lewis. It was Lewis's own nickname. It was how Lewis described, talked about sex in some of his letters to Arthur. And it was also joy. And so part of Lewis's own conversion is him coming to the realization that he needed something outside of himself. And that something turned out to be God. In a similar way, I think he's pointing out to science that just science turned in on itself, the dwarves facing the dwarves, right? The ultimate itness, the ultimate materialism will lead to nothingness. And what we need is something or a someone, as I've said many times before, outside of the self. And for Lewis, eventually, that leads to God.
Yeah. So, hopefully, with this new natural philosophy, there'll be care and respect for what's studied.
Mm-hmm.
He says, the regenerate science which I have in mind would not even do to minerals and vegetables what modern science threatens to do to man himself.
Yes.
It also won't be reductive. He says that when it is explained, it would not explain away. When it spoke of the parts, it would remember the whole.
Mm-hmm.
Its followers would not be free with words only and merely.
Yes.
And rather crucially, it wouldn't abolish man. He says, in a word, it would conquer nature without being at the same time conquered by her, and by knowledge at a lower cost than that of life.
Yes. Well, and part of it too is if we think clearly, if we think reasonably, we are thinking more like the Creator, who is the master over all of these things, right? And so rationality itself should lead us closer to the ultimate reality and the maker of that reality, which is God, right? So it's a fairly roundabout gospel presentation, but you can hear the good news in what Lewis is saying here.
It might be good news, but it does end on a note rather lacking in hope. Yeah, in speaking about this new natural philosophy, he said he might be asking for the impossible. He says that perhaps in the nature of things, analytical understanding must always be a basilisk, which kills what it sees and only sees by killing. I'm once again sad that Matt isn't here, because we've got some Harry Potter references here. But Andrew, what does he mean by this basilisk?
So a basilisk is a reptile, the kind of the serpent king, and it kills you by looking you in the eye. And you see it in Harry Potter, and so they have to look at this basilisk through a mirror or through a shield, or and the point is that science might just mean that this is inevitable, right? It's going to by examining it, even the very examination will prove deadly. That science unto itself is a self-defeating end, right? And it leads us away from rather than towards meaning and value and anything. And he says that if scientists aren't going to stop it, someone else will have to. However, he's afraid that his warnings will just be dismissed. And I think that he'd be so glad that we're talking about it this year and that so many other people continue to talk about it. There are some steps, he says, that cross a line that mark a point of no return. Here's what he says. There are progressions in which the last step is sui generis, is in its own genre, in its own type, incommensurable with the others, and in which to go the whole way is to undo all the labor of your previous journey. And so I think it's a really good warning that the end of what he's looking to, the end of the Green Book and all the implications of all of that, and what if followed all the way to the end, what will actually happen, and what actually happens isn't very good, is it?
This is how this chapter and this book ends. To reduce the Tao to mere natural product is a step of that kind. Up until that point, the kind of explanation which explains things away may give us something, though at a heavy cost. But you cannot go on explaining away forever. You will find that you have explained explanation itself away. You cannot go seeing through things forever. The whole point of seeing through something is to see something through it. It is good that the window should be transparent, because the street and the garden beyond it is opaque. How if you saw through the garden too? There's no use trying to see through first principles. If you see through everything, then everything is transparent. But a wholly transparent world is an invisible world. To see through all things is the same as not to see.
Now, come on. You can't help but see till we have faces in all of this. Orwell sees the God. She sees and then denies, and she lives her life as if she hadn't seen. And she cozies up to those people who are so smart that they have seen through, the machinations of religion or philosophy or whatever. And it's the same with Lucy. Lucy sees everything, but she sees because she loves and in order to love. And so Lewis logically takes this kind of debunking, seeing through things. Bruce Edwards, I think it was, when the movies came out, when the first Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe came out in 2005, I think it was he who was quoted maybe in USA Today. And he said, before you look, you should read the lines before you read between the lines, right? And in some ways, that's what Lewis is saying here. Vision is meant to give us a sight of something. If we have become so smart that we can see through everything, we should be able to then see through our very selves and even see through our seeing through. And I think that one of the brilliant points that Lewis keeps kind of hinting towards is if we can see through everything and debunk everything, one of the things that gets debunked is the debunking. And maybe if we will really think it through, it will actually lead us to where we really need to be.
You see, said Aslan, they will not let us help them. They have chosen cunning instead of belief. Their prison is only in their own minds, yet they are in that prison, and so afraid of being taken in that they cannot be taken out.
Yeah.
That's the last thing Aslan says in the last battle before he wraps up Narnia.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the brilliant pieces of one of the many brilliant parts of The Great Divorce is that each of those characters, except for the Red Lizard Man, can't see beyond himself or herself. They can't look to anyone else. And it's Ransom saying, trust me, Weston, say a child's prayer if you can't say a man. Reach out your hand. We'll be all right. And Weston in the end says no. And the evil of that no overcomes it. Well,
and I have to end us actually back at The Great Divorce, because we began this episode talking about the two approaches. Do I conform myself to reality, or do I manipulate reality to conform itself to me? That is the essential issue in The Great Divorce. They come into the footlands of heaven, and the grass is hard. What has to change is them. Right. Not the other way around.
Right. And that's what Orwell comes to at the end as well. The writing of her complaint was the answer, and the gods used my own pen to probe me. She complains against the gods. She rejects the gods, but she finds in the end that the gods have not rejected her. And I see those two as kind of, in some ways, as of a piece. And Lewis is developing and reiterating that idea again and again. If I will look only to myself, then myself is all I have.
Well, I hear the call for final drinks. So thanks to our stenographer, Julia, our sound engineers, Taylor and Sarah, all of our patron supporters, particularly our top tier supporters. Jacob, Alex, John, Ryan, Dan, Jody, Dave, Brian and Meg, Rebecca, Sarah, Mark, Kevin and Paul, Bud, James, Robert, Mark, Matt, Erica, Joel, Amanda, Thomas, Shane, Becca, Paul, Gary, Stephen, John, James, Kate, Peter, Rowdy, David and Angela, and of course to all of you for listening. We pray for you guys every time we release an episode. And if you've enjoyed this episode, stay with us, because in the coming weeks we're going to review this chapter as well as the book as a whole. So please join us then when we'll continue going further up
and further in.
Cheers.
Cheers.